Good. So I'm an owner of a firm called Core Financial Outsourcing, and we have locations in Philadelphia and here in Chicago. So I manage our Chicago practice, and we work with different types of small, medium-sized businesses and nonprofits across the greater Chicagoland area. And so a lot of the work that we do is to support small business owners. In this case, I'll be mainly tailoring it to for-profit businesses. But the way that we, work with them is that we tend to work with businesses that have anywhere from maybe that are pre-revenue to a few $1,000s in revenue, all the way to about $10 million in annual revenue. So we work with a wide variety of clients, and I'd say that over 95% of them are using a QuickBooks platform. So, you know, more and more companies have made the transition from the QuickBooks desktop version to the online version. The two systems do work very independently from one another, even though Intuit is the same developer for both programs. They do function in very different ways. And maybe as a quick way to start, between the two of you, if you can unmute yourselves and just kind of tell me a little bit more about what attracted you to tonight's webinar.
I'll go first. I'm pretty bad at math and accounting, that sort of thing. Although when I came here in 85, I did take an accounting class at COD, but that's the only thing I did. I just wanted to know, I worked in Addison Library actually, and a lot of people used to come for QuickBooks, and I just wondered what it is about. So out of curiosity, when Matt said he has his offering, I thought I would like to know. Just love something, learn something new.
Okay, sounds good.
And for me, I assist in the office at our church on a volunteer basis, and we've been using some church software called the Shepherd Staff, and it's ancient, and so we're trying to upgrade, update, and get moved on to QuickBooks. And one of the people that works in the office on a more regular basis, she was the financial director for Elmhurst district schools, and so she came with QuickBooks, but she's the only one that knows how to use it. So I thought this would be a great way for me to at least get some understanding of it, because for her to stop and teach me how to use it would be, just below her skill level.
Sure, no worries. And that helps me to be able to try to kind of tailor the content that I want to show both of you tonight. And so really what we're going to do is I'm going to give you an introduction to QuickBooks Online from the standpoint of building your awareness of how it's primarily designed, like what is its primary purpose and what does it do well as what it doesn't do well. So that way you have that context. And as we go through this, eventually, probably more like in the back half of this conversation, I'll actually show you a demo system. And so we'll show you some fictional company information, and I'll take you through different areas of the system so you kind of get a sense of what its capabilities are. So at a very high level, QuickBooks, I would say, has a usage rate of over 85 to 90% of small and medium-sized businesses, nonprofits, some local governmental entities are able to use it as well. And so the reason why the usage rate among the universe of those entities, I mean, we're talking about literally millions of users, is because it's extremely easy to use. It it's used by accountants like myself to work with our clients, but the clients themselves, you don't need to know accounting to use the system, which is a huge selling point. So there's other systems that are out there, um, that are more complex. They're more complicated. They're more pricey. They cost more, either one time or subscriptions, but you have to really know the principles of accounting to properly use the system. And the way that Intuit designed both the desktop and the online versions is, when I say that you don't need to know accounting, in order to do common tasks and activities, such as invoicing customers, receiving payments from customers, entering a bill from a vendor, and then paying that bill, as well as even running payroll, you don't need an accounting background to do those day-to-day activities. What you need is someone that can train the user on how to use the right forms, the right functionality, and most people just want to be told what to do. So it's a matter of really, in doing the training, it's like saying, just show me how to do it, and then show me how to do it several times so I can, get in the right habits of being accurate and consistent. And so, QuickBooks has been around for easily over 25 years, taking that model, and as a business or a nonprofit or a church or a solopreneur, as those types of entities grow, QuickBooks can grow with them. So you can have an enterprise, that's around maybe anywhere from 5 to 10 million in annual revenue, that can be on a QuickBooks system. So it's a pretty robust system. Once an enterprise gets beyond that, they would like graduate into another system because their organization can support a more robust environment. And so there's a lot of indirect support for the QuickBooks ecosystem as well. And what I mean by that is, every software is designed with a primary purpose in mind. And so QuickBooks, for example, can do inventory okay, but if you needed a very specialized form of an inventory costing method, Intuit allows other companies to develop their software that will bolt on to QuickBooks. And so it will allow for those more advanced inventory methods to happen. The same things will happen on expense reimbursement or other more complex accounting methods that need to be used. So if you kind of envision QuickBooks at the center of a wheel, they have authorized other developers to develop systems to bolt onto that. And that model is being used by other software developers as well. The other thing is, like in your case, I'm sorry, what is your D-line? What is your first name?
I'll mute myself, Debbie.
Debbie. Okay. So Debbie, as you guys kind of contemplate a transition to QuickBooks Online, the good news for you is that there is an abundance of people that are QuickBooks consultants. They don't have to necessarily be the best accountant, but what they need to be is a really good QuickBooks Online consultant. The ideal is to try to find someone that's got both skill sets, I think. But in the greater Chicagoland area, and even beyond that, given the world that we're in with a very cloud-based environment, um, QuickBooks has this indirect support network of professionals that can work with you on an ad hoc or continuous basis. And the other thing too is you consider, you're not going to work forever. At some point, you're going to want to have other people that will come into the office and replace you guys, as part of succession planning. Um, QuickBooks is really well known, by people that do accounting and bookkeeping and go from enterprise to enterprise and job to job. And it's also easier to attract people from a recruiting standpoint because they know QuickBooks, and it's also very easy to pick up. Before we dive into some of the content here, just to give you some other um, flavors of information, QuickBooks is a very versatile system. I've already talked about small businesses, nonprofits, governmental entities within the for-profit space. It can be used for just about any industry: construction, professional services, manufacturing, distribution, health and life sciences, software, other IT companies. It can be used by people that do a lot of, let's say, craft work out of their home. They'll buy materials, assemble them at home, and then go to a trade show to sell them, at those places. And so it's really, I would say, a very versatile and robust system. I think that, I'm speaking both about the desktop and the online version. Um, for the desktop version, it's still a PC-based environment. They stopped the Mac version several years ago. But with QuickBooks Online, as I move into the next slide here to talk about some of the differentiators. Sorry, let me get into the presentation mode and then switch this out. Sorry, hold on one moment. So
Terry,
this is
now I have to go get my dog and he's barking his head off. Hang on. Keep going.
sure.
Hear you, sorry. Chase, get in.
So this is not intended to be a you can see my screen with the woman with the tailoring. Okay, so this is not intended to be a shameless commercial. The purpose of it is that even though QuickBooks is extremely easy to use, it's easy for people to do these day-to-day transactions that I talked about earlier. It's still needed, in our opinion, for some type of safety net approach for that business owner, whether it's a business owner with themselves as the one employee or up to 50 employees, a larger enterprise, for them to have some type of safety net and approach by where they can get support either from QuickBooks or from a dedicated accounting professional, to make sure that the work that they're doing is accurate and consistent, and then be available for other questions. So Intuit, like a lot of other organizations, does a lot of research for what they're showing here. This is These are really good statistics. This is actually pretty much right on the mark. Now, this is not to say that 20% of businesses will fail in the first year if they don't work with an accountant. That is likely going to be for another reason, such as the nonprofit was not able to reach intended donors to get that kind of traction, or the business idea, the business model didn't resonate with buyers of that product or service. So as we kind of move into some of the technical benefits on this, I think that one of the major selling points of QuickBooks Online is that it's really in a cloud-based environment. It doesn't matter if you use a PC, a Mac, doesn't matter if you use a tablet or you want to access it on your phone. Doesn't matter if your phone is an iPhone or an Android. The There's been a breakdown of a requirement from the equipment side. And so really what is required is a stable and constant internet connection. And when you really think about where we've come as a workforce, to be able to move away from the concept of updating, a QuickBooks subscription on an annual basis, making sure that people are using the right versions between the business and their accounting firm. If someone says, well, I got trained on QuickBooks in the 2015 version and you're using 2020, how different or similar is that? The cloud-based version of QuickBooks Online eliminates all of those roadblocks. It's the updates to the main system are happening on a day-to-day basis. When you think about the security of the data, cybersecurity is obviously a very hot topic and it's very important. The data itself is stored on Intuit servers, and they can afford to spend millions of dollars a year on server security and updates. The average small business is not going to be able to spend that kind of money, or even a nonprofit to be able to put that much money in their budget. So those costs are spread out amongst all of the users of the system. Most people are also used to using by now some form of a cloud-based system. They log into a bank account to get information. They log into a retirement account. They do some logging into like a hospital MyChart type of system. The 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 adaptability of users, no matter what the demographic, the age group, et cetera, is that there's an instant recognition of a cloud-based software system. Now, there's still training that's going to be needed, of course, but it's not as restrictive as the QuickBooks desktop version. Other ones to think about would be, whether the desktop version was hosted on one computer or a server. All of that goes away. Other things in terms of the accountant's copy that's on the screen refers to a way in which information is shared between a business owner and their outside accountant to be able to review the entries in the work and then to get those entries and corrections loaded back into a system. So that has been eliminated. I think that the other one that we've really enjoyed from this is the breaking down of geographic locations. So my firm, we're working with people all over the country. It doesn't matter anymore where they're located because, we're working with people in the continental US, but we can adjust work schedules with our clients and they can adjust their schedules to be working in this cloud-based environment, and multiple people can be in the file at the same time. So if it gives you some perspective, I'm sure this won't come as a surprise, but out of all of the development teams that Intuit has in terms of product development, updates, features, only a very small percentage of those developers continue to work on the desktop version. They are just putting millions of dollars annually into the development of this system, as are a lot of other software providers. And so I think that in terms of like, those are all really nice selling points in terms of like how it's different from systems that are residing on a computer. Some of the things that we're going to look at tonight is that QuickBooks Online has the ability to synchronize with the bank account that a business will use. It can synchronize with a credit card company that enterprise would use. And the reason why that's important is because that reduces a lot of the data entry that's typically required. So when we think about working smarter and not harder, if you can kind of imagine, and I'll show you this during the demo, but there's like a feed of information that comes through that QuickBooks is synchronizing, let's say, with Chase Bank or Bank of America or any other bank, by where there's a connection available. And the user is then selecting or confirming where those transactions would get classified in the system, like which expense account, was it the expense for office supplies or travel or accounting services, etc. So the reason why that's also important is because QuickBooks has built-in artificial intelligence, which means in its case that it's going to be like a little kid where it's going to look for the patterns, it's going to look for classifications, it's going to look for entries. And as it learns, it's going to grow to recognize those transactions from vendors and expense transactions, and then it'll make suggestions for where it can go. Ultimately, there's still a human being that's involved to confirm where things go and how things get treated. Um, but as you can likely imagine, Intuit is going through great pains to really try to figure out how to make the software continuously easy to use. The other one is really, I think, the logical progression of the steps. Once you learn the flow of what's involved in a workflow, for example, when a business owner receives their utility bill today, they are entering the bill into QuickBooks, and then there's a natural flow to then pay the bill. And then when the bill is paid, all of the accounting takes place on the back end. So the user never has to worry about, well, did this go into accounts payable, or did this reduce cash when I paid it? Did it go to the right financial statement? Is it on the balance sheet or the income statement? What's really nice about QuickBooks is that as you use the forms, the accounting takes place in the programming on the back end. We as accountants can always run reports that show us the journal entries that are being used, but for the average user, they should never have to be able to do that. If they use the forms correctly, QuickBooks does the magic of putting the transactions on each of the financial statements with the right dating, et cetera. Um, so Debbie, the software that you mentioned earlier, can you tell me a little bit about it? Like, does it have that type of interface, or are people putting in like accounting journal entries?
We have to put in all,
I'm sorry, you're on mute.
we have to do it all manually. We have people that come in and we have to enter the parishioner's name, their envelope number, how much they've donated for that week. And it's every week we have to do that. So we have people that volunteer time to come and do that. And then it has to be verified by the financial secretary. And then that has to be then taken from that system because it doesn't interact with QuickBooks. It has to be then added into QuickBooks by the financial secretary. And so to try and help with that, that's why I thought if I could learn it, because I keep hearing it's so user-friendly and I'm familiar enough. I've taken accounting ad nauseum, but I don't ever want to be an accountant. So, that if it's easy enough that I could learn it, that I could help, and step up and give some assistance if she needs it, on my time off when I've got free time.
Yeah, and I think from what you're describing, one of the numerous benefits, but one of them that I can think of is really to reduce the amount of manual data entry. And what would be important for all of you as you kind of consider a possible conversion is to determine if the existing system that you have can export the data into a format that can be uploaded into QuickBooks Online. And that way then your history of transactions would go, over. One of the things that you mentioned though was that it's kind of like an older or ancient system, I think is the word that you used. So there might have to be some investigation as to whether that system can be organized in a way by where the fields and the data will transfer over. So it sounds like there would be some investigation and assessments that would be needed for that. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as I kind of talk about some of these things. The another workflow that I think is especially helpful to mention is on the invoicing side. So, if we're talking about a customer or a parishioner or some type of audience that is paying for service, paying for a product, one of the things that has been a complete, I think, game changer with QuickBooks and small businesses and nonprofits is the ability to not only create the invoice and email it electronically. That is pretty standard, but there's a combination of merchant services by where when the invoice is emailed over to the recipient and they receive it, they have the option to have more of like a one-click work through or workflow by where you might have seen them with other applications where where you click here to pay, that type of functionality. And so when that happens, QuickBooks will create a workflow for that customer or that parishioner to then get into a screen to select how they want to pay for that invoice, whether it's going to be a debit card, a credit card, or an ACH, or some type of payment method. And then once that's confirmed, QuickBooks will facilitate, and this is the really slick part, QuickBooks will facilitate the transaction between the bank of the customer and then the owner or the nonprofit. And so when you think about this gets into a different type of conversation, but in terms of how all of this information gets used, many of you have probably heard that if you run out of cash, that's typically one of the reasons why small businesses or other entities will fail or not be able to make payroll, pay the rent, other business expenses, et cetera. And so what I'm describing is really accelerating cash inflow with customers versus waiting for that customer to physically write a check and then put it in the mail and then it's mailed to the organization. And so, when you really think about being able to try to take advantage of other technology, because the banks are heavy technology, advanced and progressive as well, it really ties in well with that. So one of the things that I wanted to explain to you is in terms of the levels or the types of platforms that QuickBooks Online has. So the important thing here is not the pricing. Okay, so the pricing is subject to change. It's subject to promotions. QuickBooks Online loves to have promotions by where they'll do like 50% off for 3 months and other types of ways of getting people to activate their subscription. So the thing that's important to understand here is that QuickBooks has multiple platforms. And so when a platform is selected, it's very easy to move into the next platform. And so, for example, if someone was more of a solopreneur, that arts and crafts business owner that I referred to earlier, they can start with the simple start platform. And then as their business grows and they need to use more features, they just simply activate another subscription level and it automatically takes their existing data and puts it into the new platform and unlocks those other features. It is extremely efficient, user-friendly, very minimal disruption that happens. And so you can move up and down the platforms as needed. So, I touched on inventory earlier. You can see some of the descriptions on here where from the essentials through advanced platforms, it can accommodate multiple users. And those users can be in the system at the same time doing transactions. So when you think about a multi-user environment, like Debbie is saying that, some people are doing data entry, some people are reviewing, some people are running financial statements. Those users can be in the system at the same time doing their respective tasks. Now, there needs to still be, segregation of duties, or there needs to be the context of, if you're running a report for June, and then someone goes in while you're running that report for June and changes or enters a transaction, there's still communication that's still needed in a multi-user environment, but those things are really really key and important. QuickBooks has the ability to do things that some people might be doing in another system, like being able to issue 1099s. And so, you can do those directly within the system. QuickBooks will, you can flag and tag vendor transactions as being eligible for a 1099. And then at the appropriate time in January, when you're ready to file those, QuickBooks will help facilitate the workflow towards getting them organized, checking for acceptance, and then e-filing to the IRS, but also to the recipient. And so it is really, really slick. I'm probably going to use that word multiple times tonight as I describe it. Obviously, you could probably tell I'm a fan of QuickBooks. Our clients enjoy using it. We like using it. Like anything else, there's always some hiccups that happen, but for the most part, it's a really robust system. There's other ones that are on here that as a business grows or a nonprofit grows, they'll need to be able to do more things in the workflow. And so, examples of those would be able to do tracking mileage, doing employee reimbursements, whether it's through payroll or something else, being able to run more sophisticated reports from QuickBooks. I'll show you some examples of those, tonight. And if you really kind of think about this more advanced version, you're looking at the ability to include up to 25 users, which is really incredible from a multi-user environment standpoint. And so, when I was asking you to not really pay too much attention to the price, about the pricing, I will say it's very reasonable compared to a lot of other systems. It's a monthly subscription that you can, basically activate and cancel at just about any time. And so it's a very flexible environment. Touching on one particular item, QuickBooks can do payroll. And so, the type of payroll that QuickBooks does real well. I mentioned earlier that systems are designed in a certain way. And so the type of QuickBooks that QuickBooks can do, it can do payroll pretty well for up to 25 to 50 employees that are salary or a mix of salary and hourly. It can do payroll well for, let's say, employees that are located in one state. Once you get into a multi-state environment, that's when we would suggest that entity use a different outside payroll service that can then synchronize with QuickBooks if needed. And what I'm referring to is any number of the ones that you've heard, like ADP, Paychex, Paycom, or Paylocity is another one that's local here that you may have seen. So they can do payroll with more advanced situations. The other one is, if you have some type of limited deductions, I'm not talking about payroll taxes, I'm talking about a deduction for health insurance or a 401k. It can do those real well. Once you start getting into excessive deductions, I want part of my 401k to be pre-tax, part of it to be post-tax. Someone might be subject to a wage garnishment. You start getting into some things that are more sticky, that QuickBooks is really not the right fit, and that's a better fit for an outside payroll service. In terms of the capabilities of it, though, it's really, really powerful. From being able to do payroll for what it's intended to do, it can do payroll on any frequency that you want, whether you pay people weekly, every other week, or monthly. It can do recurring payments like, recurring payroll. It can do one-time bonuses or quarterly bonuses. It can do the federal and state payroll tax returns automatically and then e-file them. It will also be able to do what we call the remittance or the payment of the payroll taxes to the IRS and the state agencies automatically according to its requirements as well with those agencies. So for what it can do, for what it's intended to do, it's a very robust and powerful system. And so where I want to move into is to kind of give you like a test drive of the company. So we're going to go into Craig's Design and Landscaping Services. It's a fictional company. What I want to do is really show you how it's organized and how some of these things kind of come together that we've talked about. And as we go, if you have any questions on what it might be able to do, feel free to let me know so that way I can try to answer your specific questions.
If there was a sole enterprise, just one person doing something, like you mentioned, craft, things, do they need this payroll thing then?
I'm sorry, you're asking, your volume is kind of soft.
Oh,
Can you please repeat that?
yeah. If, like, say, for example, I am by myself doing selling stuff and all that. So do I need to have payroll because I have no one who I have hired? It's just me.
It's a good question. And so what it actually ties back to is how your business ultimately gets organized for tax purposes. So if you organize your business as an S corporation or a C corporation, you should take payroll as the owner, even if it's just one person being you. If you keep it in a different type of entity structure, like an LLC, um, limited liability company, which is still only it can be for just you as the one owner. There are some other options available. So it doesn't have to be payroll, but you can still use those other options to pay yourself. Okay. Okay, can you still see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So the way that, this particular system is designed is to try to use these selections on the side as a way to do specific tasks. So earlier I mentioned that when QuickBooks gets synchronized to a bank or credit card to classify transactions, we would use the banking feature here to do that. If we wanted to run payroll, we would flip down to that section and get into that module. If we wanted to work with our customers and create invoices or receive payments, we would go into that particular module. And so, we're not going to have time tonight to train you on using it. But as far as showing you examples of the versatility and the ease of the use, that's where we can start to have that conversation. So to start on the banking side, what's happening here is that this particular business has a operating checking account. They've got a savings account, and then they're also having a MasterCard credit card. Okay. And so what QuickBooks is doing is it's sending signals to and from the bank to be able to capture and check for the latest transactions available. And as new transactions happen at the bank, it's pulling that into the system. So in order for the synchronization to work properly, what's happening is that the bank is what we would call like the source of truth. It's the bank is what's driving all of this activity in terms of bringing it into the system. And so it's more of like in a lot of cases, it's a pool type of workflow. QuickBooks is reaching into Chase or whatever bank it is, I'm sorry, and then pulling those transactions in, whether it's deposits that have posted or payments out that have happened. And then the reason why we're doing this is because QuickBooks is now asking us, how do we want to classify these transactions? And so in this particular example, on July 7th, well, that's kind of interesting. July 7th in the future, we've gone into the future at this point. We have a customer called Books by Bessie, and we received $55. And so QuickBooks is making a suggestion to try to put it into an income account, and it's up to us to confirm whether or not we want that to happen. The other one that would happen is like on the expense side. There's been some type of rental that's happened. We don't, for the purposes of this conversation, we don't know if it's equipment rental or a vehicle rental. That's not what's important. What's important is that QuickBooks is giving us the transaction, and then we can open up the transaction and then determine where it would go on the chart of accounts. So for example, if I wanted to type in something like, let's see, let's just try rental. So like, we can pretend that's like equipment rental. What would happen is that the cash deduction gets posted to our register, and then the expense account lands on the income statement. That's about as much accounting as I'm going to try to tell you tonight. I think, Debbie, you've got a little bit more of a background there, but what's nice about this is that as the transactions get classified, you may have heard that transactions get posted. Well, the posting happens on the back end to those different financial statements, and then all of that data gets accumulated together, for that financial statement. And so some of the other things that are kind of neat from this is that you might be looking at these numbers here. And so even though this is fictional, it is kind of interesting. So our balance per book in QuickBooks, like in our register, I think that maybe I'm gonna group myself in your age bracket. We remember the days when we got a checkbook that had like a check register. And we updated the check register as we wrote the checks, and then we had a balance. So this 1201 number that's on here would be the balance that would be, basically in your bank book of your register that you're keeping track of. For whatever reason, there is a negative bank balance, which means that there might be transactions that have hit the bank that have not yet hit our system. And so what this would do is to be able to try to bring these balances more into alignment. What we tend to see is that the more electronic transactions that people do, the closer these numbers tend to be to each other. And so in terms of other types of accounts that can be synchronized with QuickBooks, some people, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what if I don't want my bank account or credit card synchronized between QuickBooks and the financial institution? That's perfectly fine. It's possible to not have them synchronized, but then what happens is that you're back to manually entering data into the ledger, which then defeats a lot of the purpose of the efficiency of the system. And so that's really the banking feature that's on here. These numbers that are on here, like the 25 and the 1, the 25 means that we have 25 transactions to classify. And so what tends to happen is depending on the volume of transactions, some people might need to go in here on a daily or weekly or maybe monthly level to update this information. Do you have any questions so far?
I'd just be panicked that I'm $3,000 in the hole.
Yeah.
How do you update that? Or it's ongoing?
So it's ongoing. And really what would need to happen, I think maybe the context here is we need to make sure that QuickBooks is updated properly classified transactions. And then making sure that if QuickBooks has been updated in its entirety and we still see that we're in a positive cash situation, then we would want to find out why there's another transaction over at the bank that might be causing this issue. And so there could be a time delay. in the synchronization as well. It might be that the bank feature here isn't as updated as QuickBooks is, or the other way around. This synchronization feature is something that's very fluid. If you can kind of imagine, it's a real-time feed. And so, this is not necessarily a QuickBooks versus bank issue. This is more about kind of overall the process to manage the cash and what that looks like. So that way we don't get into the situation in the first place. This is probably a bad example to use from a demo standpoint.
Yeah. Because I'm the one who still writes everything in the check register and makes it balance, and I'll erase all the entries until it all balances.
Yeah, so then the reconciliation feature in QuickBooks, since you talked about that, to reconcile the ledger to the bank statement is actually a really, it's a much easier process than a lot of other systems. And so, if we go into this particular module to reconcile, and so I'm just going to make up an ending balance. And we'll use May 31st as our cutoff date. So what's nice about QuickBooks is that it really starts to compartmentalize how to do a bank reconciliation in an efficient way. And so what I mean by that is we're looking at all of the transactions that had not yet cleared as of May 31st. But in terms of like tackling this, so the concept here is we've got our bank statement and then we're comparing it to this screen to then reconcile and see if there's transactions that are on the bank statement that have not yet been put into our check register. And so we can tackle that by focusing just on payments first, or we can flip over and do just deposits first, and then be able to break and kind of take away the bank rec one piece at a time. I think that Debbie probably has more of a conceptualization for what I'm referring to here, maybe versus you, Mayuri, given the other work that she does. But in terms of the reconciliation process, it's actually very easy to do. The more transactions that are done electronically, you might actually find that QuickBooks would actually pre-populate the bank rec with selections automatically. And so that's actually really, really nice. In terms of other activities that I talked about, like when we talk about our vendor transactions, and so vendors in QuickBooks are organizations or businesses that we pay money to. That's the definition of a vendor. And so when we get into the vendor center, in this one, there's vendors that are already pre-populated. And so, we can enter a bill and then pay the bill in QuickBooks. The form about what that looks like is that if I select Bob's Burger Joint, and then just simply through pointing and clicking, select bill, what's going to happen is the focus is just on filling in the fields of the form. So compared, Debbie, to what you guys are experiencing with the other system, we're not having to worry about like, do I debit the expense account and credit accounts payable? That's not the focus of the form. You won't find that in here. Instead, what we're doing is we're looking at the invoice that we received, and then we are filling out the payment terms. We are making sure that the bill date that we enter here matches the bill date that's on that invoice. We're putting in like an invoice number. Down here is where we would select the category. So the category is the expense account that it would go to, but that's really the only accounting that we're really being expected to know, in this scenario. The other one that's really interesting is, you can type in your own memos here, as descriptions for other users. You can attach the invoice that you received from that vendor. So let's say it was emailed to you, typically as a PDF, you can drag and drop it. So that way then as somebody else has questions about that bill, they can bring it up from this selection here. So it's got a very robust electronic document management, document storage. And so when you think about how much work goes into maintaining electronic file storage, being able to do that in here is a really powerful feature of this, all still stored on Intuit servers in a safe, secure environment. I use that phrase, safe and secure, with the context that, I think that any company is vulnerable, whether it's a small business or we've seen in the news, something happens with a company like Target, that made national headlines. Would I ever say that Intuit is 100% secure? I would never say that, because I don't think that any company is. But I think it's a lot more secure than the average small business, church, or nonprofit.
Right.
And so once those transactions go into the bill, then we can manage that by then paying the bill from whatever account we want to use. Just to show you the other form that I referenced, and then I'll show you some reports in a moment. I also talked about invoicing. So as you can see, a lot of what I'm doing is a point and click in terms of the navigation. And that's what resonates a lot with people, because they're doing the same thing in those other environments. And so when we want to click on creating a new invoice for this bird sanctuary, it's going to bring up a form in which, again, we're not worrying about, do I debit accounts receivable, and which revenue account do I credit? Being able to worry about things like that with the right dates. This is literally more about making sure that the customer contact information is still current. Now we're the ones that are setting the payment terms. So whether that's net 30, net 15, whatever, the invoice date, and then depending on what terms we select, the due date will automatically populate. And then down here, it's more about the product or service that we're selling. I would say that in QuickBooks, the one major area that's different than a lot of other systems is this product or service list. This is something that's very unique to QuickBooks. It's not like you're going to open up an accounting book and find references to this product or service list. It's not like you're going to go from QuickBooks to another software is Sage Intacct or Xero or one of these other ones and find the concept of this product or service list. So what this is that in order to make the invoicing run efficiently, QuickBooks and Intuit designed a feature called the item list, which is literally a listing of every product or service that entity sells. So in my world, an example of a service that I would sell is like QuickBooks training. And then on the back end, that service is tied to a certain revenue account. And what happens is that every time I create an invoice for QuickBooks training, you create the invoice, and when you save and close it, it will post it automatically to that specific revenue account. Other ones, like in Debbie's world, with you mentioned that you were part of a church, correct?
Right. So in other words, we might send we wouldn't actually send an invoice, but we might bill someone to have their wedding at the church.
Absolutely.
you know, so we would put it on the books for $250 that someone gave us $250 and we'd have to put it somewhere.
Yeah, so like in your world, you know, there's um there's weddings and baptisms and other
Funerals.
sacraments. There's also Sunday school, or there's like summer vacation school, or whatever the program, you know, is going to be. And then being able to you know, QuickBooks can also do, instead of doing an invoice, you know, let's say it's an environment in which someone is calling up and saying, I want to pay for the wedding booking. And so you're running their credit card or whatever the payment is going to be. And it's more of what's called a sales receipt in QuickBooks.
Yeah, we wouldn't really call it an invoice.
Right. And so it bypasses that type of workflow, but it gets to the same place with money received and revenue recognized. So it's this item list is an area that would take some thought to put together. Most small businesses, nonprofits, churches, and other enterprises, their item list is no more than a half a page. And so that's where you can, you know, learn about it from a QuickBooks consultant. They can show you how to create it, and then you can create your own, and then they can review it. A lot of QuickBooks consultants, the way that you learn QuickBooks is that they teach you how to do it a few times, and then they watch you do it, and then they send you off on your own, you know, to do the homework of, you know, basically building it out to be reviewed later. So, you know, that type of workflow with the invoicing is really, it's really neat. In terms of the reports that are available in QuickBooks, I mean, there's over 100 standard reports. You know, the thing that I'll ask you to think about as I start to bring these up is that as I showed you the forms of those fields of information, each of those fields, QuickBooks is like a relational database, is what we call it. And what it's doing is that it's collecting all of this information and these data points, and then depending on the report that you need, the reports filter that data to be shown in a certain way based on time period, the nature of what's supposed to be included or excluded, et cetera. So, you know, the type of financial statement that most people can understand right away that don't have an accounting background would be like a profit and loss statement. You know, when we click on that, we're looking at the accumulation of data that has been filtered to be revenue versus expense. And what we're looking at also is a date range of January 1st through June 7th. And so, you know, we can use all different types of pre-formatted period selections, or ultimately we can make our own selection of the date range that we wanted. So as examples, we can look at this week, this quarter, this year. We can flip around to looking at last year, presuming that the data is in the system, you know, et cetera. And so, you know, we can flip back and forth, you know, there's certain things that happen from an accounting and a tax treatment based on the accounting method that we want to use. So we can flip back and forth between different accounting methods that would be used more like by people like me, but I'm still a user, and that functionality is available. And so what's also nice is that we can, you know, export these reports to Excel, to a PDF. We can email them to people. And so there's a lot of, I think, ease of sharing of information in this as well. So Matt, I know that you've been like really taking close notes for your quiz that I'm going to give you at the end of the seminar. So what questions maybe do you have?
Oh, well, if anyone else has any questions, they can go first, but I think this was a great overview of QuickBooks Online. I definitely learned a lot from it. Just seeing the user face, like this is the first time me actually looking at QuickBooks. I usually just use Intuit for TurboTax at tax time, but
It's
yeah.
another good example. Yeah.
Mhm. But yeah.
Debbie, did you say that you had a list of questions?
No, I said I was taking good
Oh,
notes.
good notes. Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, because I'm really very interested in it, and I'm just thinking, if we do the desktop version, how hard is it to convert to the online version?
That's a great question. The conversion is actually pretty seamless between QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. Since Intuit does make both systems, it's been in their best interest to make the conversion as easy as possible. Most conversions can happen without what's called QuickBooks Customer Care, where it can really be done either on your own or with someone like myself, with our folks. And so we kind of walk it through and we make sure that the data has been transferred correctly with certain reports and then other validations. Where it gets a little bit trickier is when we have 3 features that are being used. One of them would be inventory. That does bring but I don't think that applies to you. The other one would be if QuickBooks Desktop payroll is being used. There would need to be some extra attention there. And then finally, a feature called classes, which is a way of segmenting revenue and expense. It's most often used by franchises, franchise owners that have more than one location. And so what I would really kind of emphasize to you is that it's perfectly fine to use the desktop version. There's just a couple of things to keep in mind. One, it's not going to look anything like this. Yeah, so it's a completely different functionality. Number 2 is the desktop version is a more robust system. And what I mean by that is since it resides on a computer or a server, the programming is different where it does allow for more detail of data to be entered in terms of fields. Okay. What I'm getting at is like in a customer profile, you can set custom fields up for things like your like a customer that you use or a vendor that you use, like birthdays, spouses' names, kids' names, whatever. It's got some more advantages that way. The thing that I'll kind of say though about the desktop version is, having used both systems, the desktop version is more constraining. And what I mean, but that can be both good and bad. It depends on who is using the system in your office. If people want more of a limited way of getting in the workflow, like they just want to be told what to do the same way over and over again, it's really good for that. For people that like to do transactions where they want the flexibility to navigate to get to the same outcome, the same place, the online version is more advantageous. It also depends on the type of users that you currently have, as well as those that you ultimately will attract. I would say that the younger workforce, as well as the more progressive people with technology, want the online version. There is no right or wrong answer. The other one would be in terms of how the desktop version would be what we call hosted. Would it be on a server? And so, servers we're presuming are being used for other things, by the organization. So there's maintenance and security of the server that has to happen, as well as, are the users going to be using the system on site, or are they going to be like accessing it from their homes or another place? Because then what's happening is that they're using like an internet connection to, let's say, log in to a gateway to then get into the server to get into QuickBooks. So there's multiple toll gates that are needed for that access model, versus what I'm showing you here, which is that you go to a website, you log in and you're in. If the experience is slow from a user standpoint on QuickBooks Online, it typically has to deal with whether they're using So then are they wireless? And if they're wireless, how close or far are they to the router? What's their internet connection typically like at home? Or are they hardwired with like an Ethernet cord directly into the router? That is the extent of my IT experience. So if there's anything more than that, then you're going to have to call up one of your IT parishioners for their opinion.
Okay, no, actually, we have one desktop. We still have an old tower, and that's what it's on, and it's one person that uses it. And like I said, she was a finance secretary for a school district, and she's the only one that knows how to use it. And that's why we're kind of afraid that, you know, if she decides that she doesn't want to do it anymore, we're kind of SOL, because then we're stuck with this other software that is really old, and our volunteers at this point are, for lack of a better word, are cute little old church ladies who are, you know, 70-year-old ladies. And so, you know, we're looking for easy, understandable, user-friendly, and it seems like the online one, it would be very user-friendly for someone in someone that could just point and click, and if we show them the steps, point here, click here, do this, you know, that's kind of what we need until we can find someone. I mean, our secretary is very tech savvy. She was a marketing person at a college for many years, but then she left that field, you know, to become a stay-at-home mom. And so she just does, you know, our secretary stuff now because it's flexible. And she could very easily take this over if we switch to something like this.
Right. And you know, the purpose of these meetings is not for me to turn this like into a sales presentation and to try to solicit for business. I love volunteering with the Addison Public Library. I've been part of it for a number of years. In this setting, you know, I can type my information into the chat box, and it can be up to you if you want to contact me afterwards, by where we can do like an initial complimentary consultation. It can be myself, one of my team members that's very fluent in other systems, and we can try to get a better sense of, you know, what the feasibility of taking the data from one system and getting it into a QuickBooks environment, whether that's desktop or online. You know, and as I put this information in the chat box for you, the thing that I'll tell you in terms of like, we've done hundreds of trainings for both versions. And the thing that I'll tell you is I am continuously surprised at the number of, I'm not going to say elderly is not a good way of saying it. What I'm saying is people that are retired from the workforce, that are volunteers for a number of years. They are very proficient and quick at learning cloud-based systems. I've been pleasantly surprised, and I think it really goes back to, because they're using other systems that are cloud-based, they're already used to a lot of the functionality. And what's also really nice when you think about the concept of kind of breaking the cord of an on-premise system like that tower that you mentioned. You know, if we lived in a part of the country where it was like reasonably good climate all year long, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But when you think about, forget COVID, when you think about just a regular snowstorm, you know, being able to get into the office, or when it's being able to do things remotely or while being on vacation, it's all, you know, a lot more easier to be able to convince people that, well, we appreciate you being a volunteer and we're making it as open and flexible as possible to then do that work, even if you feel that you need to do it remotely or to double check something.
Right, and she's, you know, she lives part-time in Florida, so that would make it much easier as well. If we can keep her doing what she does, and she can do it from Florida.
Absolutely. And it really just changes the way in which you consider your ability to recruit, attract, and and keep really good volunteers in this role, because then it also makes it easier for them to train somebody else. And so, like I said, we are really passionate about this because we really do like to help people, and we'll give you an honest opinion of whether, um, what type of maybe migration would be involved. It may be required. We've done some kind of creative things where there is really, in some cases, depending on the old systems that were used, we weren't able to get the data to go directly from that system to QuickBooks Online, but instead what we had to do was just go from the old system to QuickBooks Desktop that you never saw, and then from there going into QuickBooks Online. But instead of you going out and paying $500 for a system like Desktop that you're not going to use, it's like you're taking advantage of what a consultant has to then get it ultimately to the end goal that you want. And so, if I don't feel like, in giving you that perspective too, if we feel like you deserve another specialist, we'll give you that advice. So my contact information is up there. Feel free to let me know if you want to chat.
Thank you. Yes, I'll talk to the office tomorrow and make sure that I'm not speaking, out here in left field,
Sure.
right field, I guess that's right. So, and then I'll definitely reach out to you.
Yeah, and if you want to include more other people on your team to have that conversation, by all means, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So then, like, to kind of bring, I think, all of this together, I think that what I would really hope for you guys to kind of walk, like if someone were to ask you, that you were talking about with this meeting tonight, really the key takeaways are, it's a very flexible, robust system. The data is securely stored online and into its servers. Just like whether they realize it or not, a lot of their other information is being stored in the cloud as well. It's got the ability to do a lot of workflows that we consider to be progressive, that are electronic, by where it really utilizes a lot of the existing and future technology that you're going to see coming out to be able to do more things to basically run the business or run the enterprise. The reports that I showed you too is that we have to remember that it is in more or less it's an off-the-shelf system. So the reports are standard. A lot of other higher end systems, you have to build and design the reports yourself. So, if you wanted to have the report structured in a very specific way, that's where it does have the capability of exporting it to Excel, and then you can rearrange it from there. So it's, I think the other thing that was key about this is a multi-user environment that's really equipment agnostic. Again, doesn't have to be worrying about PC versus Mac. And, just the other day, I had to go into a meeting and I didn't want to take my computer with. And so I just took my iPad, logged into QuickBooks, and I did the demonstration that way, as well as did the presentation. And yes, the tablet version does look different than what I showed you here, but you can still move and navigate amongst it. I think that's the thing to really be maybe aware of, is that Intuit is going through a lot of thoughtfulness towards making the user experience flow seamless, whether it's in like they're in front of a computer, or whether it's on a tablet, or even for people that I described earlier. I was at a convention last week, to give you some perspective, and the booth across from me is selling live goods at the conference, whereas mine are more services that I talk to. So it's not like I'm going to sell a tax return at a conference, right? So, this guy had a tangible product that he was selling. And so he's, doing merchandise sales throughout the day by using a card reader that's plugged into his tablet that is synchronizing with QuickBooks Online in real time. So it is really, really slick from a lot of different perspectives.